So here we are. We are at April 3rd Thursday. The Writers League does a program every third Thursday, and the last two have now been virtual, but typically they happen in a room together in Book People, the independent bookstore here in Austin, Texas. But we have happily moved this online, and for this month's discussion, this was actually a suggestion from one of our panelists, Charlotte Gullick, and it was a great one, and that was to turn our attention to getting personal, writing essays and memoir. So I'm going to introduce our panelists without further ado. Antonio Ruiz-Camacho was born and raised in Toluca, Mexico. He moved to the US at the age of 31 and began to write in English at 35. A former Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford University and Adobe Paisano Fellow in Fiction, the University of Texas at Austin and the Texas Institute of Letters, he earned his MFA from the New Writers Project at UT Austin. His work has appeared in the New York Times, Salon, Texas Monthly, and elsewhere. He's the author of the story collection Barefoot Dogs, the wonderful story collection, I'll say, Barefoot Dogs, which has gotten a lot of attention, including winning the Jesse H. Jones Award for Best Book of Fiction in 2015, and the forthcoming novel, The Healing Room. So thank you so much for being here, Antonio. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. I was so looking forward to tonight for the whole week. It's been, yeah, this
cool.
is
Well, it's good to see you. And I should mention that you also were kind enough to record a craft presentation for us recently on writing personal essays, which is why you were, of course, an obvious perfect choice for this. So we'll make sure that folks know where they can find that as well at the end of this. And Charlotte Gullick is chair of the Creative Writing Department at Austin Community College. She holds a BA in Literature Creative Writing from UC Santa Cruz and an MA in English Creative Writing from UC Davis, as well as an MFA in Creative Nonfiction from the Institute of American Indian Arts. Her awards include a Christopher Isherwood Fellowship for Fiction, a Colorado Council on the Arts Fellowship for Poetry, and residencies at MacDowell and Ragdale. And she is the author of the very lovely, beautiful and beautifully jacketed, by the way, gorgeous cover, of the novel By Way of Water. So Charlotte, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. And the other thing, you guys have, the Writers League has pivoted so beautifully, and I actually feel a little choked up that just you guys have been really doing and thought about community in really powerful ways. And like when there's so much that seems uncertain, you guys have been really steady, and I'm just grateful. So I wanted to make sure I said that.
Oh, thank you. Wow.
And I'm talking to your little picture, not to the camera. Sorry, I really mean it.
I talk to the camera. It always looks like I'm just looking down, which, why not? All right, so here we come full circle back to this, this placeholder. And so let's jump in. I feel like there's probably going to be really great conversation generated just from what you guys say in answer to some of the questions that I've put together. But I guess it would be great to just start with each of you giving us some context in terms of yourselves as writers, what your writer relationship is with personal essay and memoir. So I'm going to start with you, Charlotte.
So, I mean, it's a great question. I think I didn't for a long time realize the difference between memoir and personal essay. And I think the descriptions are really fuzzy. And I'd love to hear how Antonio defines this, but I think a personal essay is more contemporary. I'm looking up and around at what's happening right now. And memoir is more about memory and making meaning of those memories. Of course, in personal essay, you might pull something from the past into the present. So, I was drawn to nonfiction in the memoir realm first because there was some things I wanted to write about from my own childhood. But now I'm doing both. I'm writing both memoir pieces and personal essay. And in the personal essay arena, I'm really interested in lyric essays and how poetry can inform how you're working with image, how you're working with repetition. And I will also say this, that I have a nonfiction book proposal, and I've actually changed its focus in the last 3 weeks because of what's going on. And it's actually allowing me to get to a place where I'm bringing memoir and personal essay more closely together. And it was weird at first to be like, oh my God, I'm an opportunistic person. And then I was like, no, I'm feeling something that I've felt for a really long time. And this is actually highlighting that feeling and giving me the opportunity to articulate it.
So meaning the what we're going through in the present day is helping you connect more sort of clearly with the past, or in a way that's more clearly going to say what you want to say?
Yeah, because the collection is focused on health inequities. And we're seeing that play out right now. And I think it's so in my face right now that it's making me think about things that I grew up with through this new, I guess, more focused lens.
So interesting. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Antonio, what about you?
Yeah, I think I agree with Charlotte's definition of the difference between personal essay and memoir. I would add that you can write a personal essay about mostly anything. It's kind of like you can tackle any subject, any topic through your personal perspective. And a memoir piece can be even contemporary, but just revolve around yourself, your own experience, and nothing else. Is more self-centered, if you will, a memoir piece. It's funny because when you were introducing me, using that introduction about when I started to write in English, I actually started writing nonfiction instead of fiction. I have been writing fiction for a long time in Spanish, which is my native language, but I don't think I have written personal essays or memoir pieces in Spanish. So I can like love the concept of the memoir piece, even in its short or long form, the way we approach it here in the American letters, I would say. What else can I say about memoir? Well, I finished my second book, as you mentioned. It's a novel. It is a novel. The first book was a story collection. Both are fiction. And I'm kind of like terrified to start a third book of fiction, just because it's very hard for me to write. I love writing fiction, but it's very hard because I don't know the story. It's a process of investigation. I can't outline, I can't sketch, I can predict what the story is going to be about, what the characters are going to want. They need to come to me, and that might take years. It took me 7 years to finish the novel. And I think I'm starting to write a memoir, which is a project that I discarded originally, about my relationship with my father in very specific terms. But it's funny because for me, because at least I know what story I am going to tell in a memoir piece, it provides a sense of certainty that I could use right now.
Right.
I mean, I love writing fiction, but fiction is just like the uncertain, like in big capital letters.
Right. Right. Well, so let's talk. I think we'll start with personal essay, because it feels like the natural sort of next stop before we really get into memoir. And I guess I'm just wondering, from both of your perspectives, for somebody who's approaching writing a personal essay, where, you just mentioned, Antonio, that you don't do a lot of pre-writing for your fiction, right? I'm just curious, what is your process for starting a personal piece, a short personal piece?
It's a little bit similar. I don't do outlines, but I start with the idea that I need to tell a story, regardless of whether it's fiction or nonfiction. I think even a poem tells a story with that, the beginning, kind of like a dramatic arch and then an ending, and you need to provide a sense of a journey or a sense of transformation throughout the narrative. So when I start writing a piece, a personal essay, at least I know what the limits of that story are, the boundaries, what the scope. Then I think the writing the piece involves investigating or discovering that journey. I know where the story starts, I know where it will end, but I don't know the roads that I will take to get from point A to point B. And it's all about starting to find images that will become scenes, as opposed to fiction where I just know point A, but I don't know the roads and I don't know what point B is and how long it will take me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so you build the road out of the scenes that you feel are going to get you to the place that you're going to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when you say investigate, just to stick with you for a second, when you say investigate, knowing you have a journalism background, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you mean actually investigating, or is there much reportage that you would do for that, or just you mean more investigating your own sort of reasons for writing this piece or where the piece is meant to be?
A little bit of all of that. Just to give you an example, I recently wrote a personal essay about my experience living for a month at a ranch close to the Texas-Mexico border. I was there for a month last year finishing my second book, and Michael Hoinske from Texas Highways approached me asking me to write a personal essay. And I chose to write about this piece, and all I knew then was that when I was at the ranch, it reminded me a lot of my father's ranch when I was a kid. My father had a ranch in central Mexico where I would go and visit and spend time there. And the topography and the geography and the landscape, everything was very, very different, but it reminded me a lot of that place. So when I decided to write this personal essay about that experience, I knew that was that was going to be kind of like the emotional core of the essay. Why this place that was so seemingly different reminded me so much to that other place that meant so much to me emotionally in terms of memory. So what I did was go back to the place. I spent a weekend there in October with the purpose of investigating that emotion, that memory, why it reminded me so strongly to this other place. And so I came back and did kind of like a journalistic investigation of the place and of my own emotions and my memory. So it's both to gather information that I hadn't collected when I was there, because I didn't know that I would write about that experience. So I needed to go back and just refresh my mind, knew what kind of elements I could use in terms of imagery and scenes and everything, but also investigate my own emotional journey around the piece.
Yeah, thank you. I read that piece.
Thank you.
Charlotte?
Yes.
How about you? How do you do it? How do you approach an essay or a personal?
It's a lot like Antonio said, but I think I use investigation in a slightly different way. I mean, I guess it overlaps what he was saying about investigating his own emotion. And I'm frantically taking notes as he's being so wise. So one of the things that I think for personal essay for me is like what's capturing my imagination? Where is my mind? What do I keep returning to right now? And where are the emotional snags? If I sit down to like journal, I'm like, what's up with me? oh, I'm really thinking about that thing that doctor said to my sister. And then I just kind of explore. And one of the really cool things I think about essay, well, I guess the thing about writing that's cool is you can like, so why does this thing catch my imagination or my emotion so much? And how does that connect up to something from my past? Get really interested in paralleling and mirroring. So I'm trying to work on something over December. I was out of Texas for 27 days. I was a week with my mom, and then I was 17 days in New York with my sister, and they both were in the hospital. And my sister had very high drama situation. And it turned out that the two doctors were disagreeing about her situation because of religious differences. And that, you know, they both had very strong opinions. They're both very educated and professional. And when we finally got them in the same room, we figured it out. And one of them said to me later, he goes, "You're about to start a religious war." And it was so interesting. Ultimately, my sister got the care that she needed. But I grew up in a household that was very torn by religion. And so I'm just like, okay, what was it about that? So I guess to answer your question, I'm looking for, I'm looking into my own mind. Where am I curious? Where are the snags? Where are the wounds? And how can I help myself make sense of this?
Mm-hmm. And so the sort of the chicken and the egg, I guess, is what I'm looking at is, yeah, do you examine the past first, or are you looking at, or is it things happening to you in the present day that are then allowing you to connect back to the past, which sounds more like what you're talking about there?
Well, I think when I first started nonfiction, it was, I was interested in my memories. Mm-hmm. And who that younger self was and how those memories shape who I am now. And now I think it's more of, okay, what's current? And then how does that hook up to the past? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I hadn't realized, but it's a process that has changed for me. And I think part of that is reading people like Leslie Jamison and Eula Biss, and look at like Eula Biss's book, No Man's Land. That collection of essays is really interesting on the volume of her personal presence. The first one, it's pretty low. And then the next one, she turns it up. And she's really, that's been instructive to me. A personal essay, you can be uber present, or you can really pull it back like she does in that first essay. And I don't think she uses the I voice until the final paragraph. Mm-hmm. Wow. I don't think both chicken and egg were born at the same time.
That's a totally different panel discussion.
Okay.
Well, so then let me ask both, because when we talk about fiction, I think oftentimes we talk about voice, right? Or voice is one of the big pieces of fiction that we focus on. Finding your voice, making sure your voice is consistent, strong narrative voice. So when you're writing personal essay or you're writing memoir, how are you thinking about your voice, and how do you work hard to make whatever that is consistent in every piece that you're writing? I mean, I think what you just said about Eula Biss is interesting, because it is a different, maybe she's changing some piece of that as she's writing those different pieces. So am I making sense here? Like, where does the idea of your narrative voice come in when you are the person writing about your experiences?
Are you asking me first?
I'm gonna direct it. Yeah, because I'm kind of staring at your box, even though you can't tell.
And I'm on the exercise while moving around. Sorry. Well, voice is super interesting in memoir because good old Philip Lopate. He talks about the double lens that you need to have: the voice of then and the voice of now, the voice of innocence, the voice of experience. So there's that kind of voice. Are you reflecting on the events of the past from a present self? And, Vivian Gornick, she says it really harshly, like, you get no credit for living. It's the sense that you make of it now. So there's that part of memoir. But then I think voice is also the way you use language, like what are your verb choices, what are your sentence styles. And I mean, the collection I'm working on together, they have different stances, I think, on the thing. Some are more flips, some are more serious, but I think you can feel consistently that Charlotte has her chip on her shoulder. I don't know, I'd love to hear what Antonio says about voice in this one.
Yeah, how do you approach it, Antonio?
Funny that you mentioned Philip Lopez, because I have his Bible here. If you need to buy one book about personal essays, I would buy this one. And it's only,
tell us the name of it again. It's Art of the Personal Essay.
The Art of the Personal Essay.
Philip.
And it has all kinds of personal essays, from like centuries old ones, authors like Michel de Montaigne, and I think somebody else. I mean, very Seneca, to Joan Didion and Carlos Fuentes and Annie Dillard, Richard Rodriguez. But anyway, I'm digressing. Yeah, I agree with what Charlotte was saying. I think the voice in a personal essay is driven by several elements. One is that distance between memory, as Charlotte was saying, and what you make of that experience, that distance that you have achieved between what happened to you, those experiences, and what you have learned. Even if you will only learn about that experience through the process of writing the essay. You don't have to know exactly how that experience changed you or defined you or transformed you before you started writing the essay. I think part of the fun of writing it is that sense of discovery of your own experience. But I think it's also driven by the story itself. Keep going back to the sense of storytelling in personal essay, and similar to fiction, where different characters that you create may have different voices. I think you can have a different voice depending on the essay that you're writing and the topic that you are approaching. And I think that combination of the topic, your memory, and that distance between memory and experience, and the time that you are writing about that experience, kind of like defines the voice that will drive the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
So you're both talking about memory and experience, of course, and that's a big piece of both personal essay and then memoir, whether it's shorter or longer form. So let's talk about memory and then also truth telling. And, something that comes up, I think, a lot in conversations like this, but I would love to hear your perspective, which is, of course, you remember things as you remember them, but how do you navigate those somewhat tricky waters of your experience versus someone else's experience? Antonio.
Yeah, whenever I talk about how to use your own personal material or your own autobiography or family stories for both fiction and nonfiction, but in this case for nonfiction, I think what's important in terms of truth is to talk about emotional truths, your emotional truth. And obviously there are some elements, like there are also facts that are going to be part of the personal essay, right? And in that case, you as a writer have a responsibility to get your facts right. And if your memory is not, well, let me take one step back. Your memory can provide your emotional truth, but it can be unreliable from the journalistic perspective, because everybody remembers things differently if we talk about this panel in a couple of weeks, you, Becca, will remember it differently than the way Charlotte will, and the rest of the guests will, and the way I will, because we all bring our own experience to this collective event, right? So our memory will create different experiences. But you need to get your facts right, or at least strive to get those facts right. Now, when it comes to the emotional truth, if you are writing a personal essay or writing a memoir piece, it is your truth. It is your emotional truth. And that's what matters. So how this specific event has changed or transformed or affected somebody else will define how that person remembers this moment. But what's important for that essay is your emotional truth. Does that make sense?
It does. When you say get the facts right, can you give an example of what would be a fact that has to be gotten right versus something you may recall that someone else may recall differently?
Mm-hmm. Well, I go back to the silly example of today's panel. It's a fact as simple as it happened today on this date at this time. There were 124 participants as of right now. Yay! Yeah, such a big crowd. It's very exciting. And I was wearing a blue shirt. You know, that kind of facts. When I did when I wrote the personal essay about the ranch, I had to go back and I talk about geography and landscape a lot, and there were a lot of names of plants that I knew were there, but I didn't know their names. So I had to go back and make sure that I would get all of that right. How the distance, how long that ranch is from San Antonio. 87 miles or 150 miles. I mean, there are facts that are undisputable. Mm-hmm. Today we had 124 participants, regardless of how you and Charlotte will remember this night. Mm-hmm. You know, those are the facts. Whether you will remember it as a wonderful panel or a waste of time, that doesn't change the fact that we had 124 participants.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Charlotte, what about you and truth-telling and memory and all of this good stuff?
So when I teach at ACC, so all of my students, our first assignment is you have to do an exploration of your own nonfiction ethics. So we talk about what Antonio just talked about. What the facts are, things that you can generally corroborate, although that gets a little tricky sometimes. And someone said, we all realize that our memory is limited. This country is obsessed with the difference between truth and emotional truth and factual truth. And there's so many instances of that I think writers have to dive into it and ask themselves, you know, what am I willing to stand behind? And so in the nonfiction ethics exercise, people have to ask themselves, am I willing to make up dialogue? Because we don't remember things verbatim. And if I put something in quotation marks, am I saying that I remember that exactly? Or am I tapping into emotional truth and that's what it felt like they said, or this is the kind of way that they would say things? I ask people to talk about whether they're willing to compress time. And I've done this in a piece that was published on Brevity, and it's coming out on their best of. I have fun in Rose Metal Press in a while. And it's an experience that happened on 2 different days, but I wrote as if they happened on the same day because that's how it lives in my memory and that's how it felt. Some people would have huge problems with the fact that I did that, but I'm willing to stand behind that. Then the third element where it seems like most people aren't willing to do this is composite characters. Are you willing to take what one cousin said and put it on a aunt's body or whatever? So to dive into those issues is really important. And a lot of times students find out that when I pick up a book that says it's based in fact, I expect to have facts override emotional truth. But when I'm a writer, I have a lot more latitude. And so you start to feel that hypocrisy that we might be living within ourselves. And so it's a really good exercise. A couple more things there. Sebastian Junger's book, War, I mean, he's a long form journalist, and so that's really interesting. He puts a disclaimer at the beginning of his book, and anything that appears in double quotations is something that was recorded or he wrote down verbatim, word for word. Anything that's in single quotations is he's remembering it to the best of his ability. And what I think he's done there, he's establishing his credibility with us to acknowledge that his memory is only so good. And then like Mary Carr's book, I know quite a few people mentioned that. One of the first lines is, the memory comes into focus. And what she does, she's establishing credibility that I don't remember everything exactly, but this moment stands out sharply. And I guess the last thing I would say is that I just came up with this. I'm gonna test it out on y'all. Let me know. Fact is denotation and emotional truth is connotation. Like, so that a chair is a chair versus, you know, connotations, that's all the emotional associations we bring to it, which is going to be colored by our subjectivity. Mm-hmm. Does that work?
Yeah, love it.
So far, Pam agrees with that statement.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Thank you, Antonio.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more, or maybe talk a little bit about carrying, you know, this a bit further, writing about other people. So not just writing memories that you experienced at the same time that someone else may have experienced it, but writing about other people and how you navigate that. So I'm going to start where we just left off with you, Charlotte, on this one.
Okay, so this will come up later. It's my very weathered copy of Writing the One Memoir by Judith Barrington. This is a great book. And she has a whole chapter on here called Writing About Living People. And she asks you to think about it pretty heavily, like what's the responsibility to write about other people? I want to say, like, on a first draft, many of us, particularly in memoir, we're telling our own truth for the first time. And if we start to consider other people, we might kind of hamstring our own truth. So I think first drafts, it's really important to actually not show it to anybody, particularly family members. And like, let yourself explore what it is that you're interested in exploring. And then later you can come back and start to think about it. I have found that writing memoir has made me feel more compassion and empathy for the people I was angry with than almost any kind of, it's better than therapy. There's a great article on Brevity, the Journal of Concise Literary Nonfiction, and it's The Ethics of Empathy, and she has 6 strategies for you to try out when you're considering writing about other people. And she says it's not just important to do it in a way that tries to honor the struggle where they're coming from, but you're actually going to create more compelling work if you do that. Mm. But I will say, I have a memoir that my mom hasn't read, and she doesn't know I've written it. So,
yeah, you know, it's a gray area.
Yeah.
Antonio, what about you? Writing about other people?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, in a workshop that I taught for the Writers League several times around how to use this real life material for fiction and nonfiction, I started the discussion by suggesting participants to ask themselves a couple of questions when they are trying to decide what genre they would like to use or they should use to tell these stories. One is whether you have the material to write a good story, and then we delve into what is a good story, what elements you should have in order to write a good story. But the second question is, how comfortable would you feel telling the story exactly as it happened, disclosing the exact names of the real people that participated in that experience, and how comfortable would you feel disclosing other people's lives? Because in many cases, as we all know, both in fiction and nonfiction, we will write about those people that have defined us the most, and in many cases, those are family. So they are not responsible for your wanting to write. You know, my family didn't sign up for having a nonfiction writer in right. And some people might be okay with you disclosing their details of their private lives, but others might be uncomfortable, even if they come across as sympathetic or generous or in a positive way. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact that you will disclose something uncomfortable or negative or sensitive about them. It has to do with the boundaries of personal privacy. And I think that's a good consideration. It's something that you need to ask yourself, and you might even want to even ask those people, not for permission, but just to check in on them. That was one of the reasons when I started just like playing with the idea of writing a memoir a few years ago. I decided to drop it because I thought I would better use that material for fiction, because I didn't want to have that responsibility to have to deal with the fact of disclosing elements of my personal or of my own family. You know, like I would use that material anyway, but in fiction, and fiction gives you this shield, right? Mm-hmm. This protective layer that if whoever comes and say, hey, that character that's me, book, like, no, it's fiction. Even if you know that 99% of that character, it's that person, you can always say it's fiction, you know? So I think it's very important to seriously ask that question, and then deal with the consequences, you know, of using other people's experiences in your own writing and disclosing them exactly as they are, or they were.
Right, because if you're going to ask the question, you have to be willing to receive the answer, whatever the answer might be, right? And you might find that there are people who actually are very uncomfortable with that story being told. And then what do you do? Or do you guys write about, have you written about experiences and done that, changed, you know, done a composite character, or you know, nonfiction, but you've done certain things to protect the, you know, identity of somebody who's involved in the story? And what are those things that you tend to do?
If I may go first, when I go back to that example of the memoir I was writing, I started just like trying to explore that possibility. So I would, for example, I changed all my siblings' names to Russian names, which was people. I would do like public readings of those memoir pieces, and people would love it. And I felt it was just so gimmicky. And I just realized I'm just like doing fiction. I'm writing fiction here, mm-hmm. you know. And to me, fiction can be even can deliver a higher truth than facts, you know. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily think that because I'm using real life material in fiction is less powerful. So whenever the moment I feel that I need to reshape an experience because of whatever qualm I might have about disclosing real life information, I just turn to fiction. And maybe it's because of my journalistic approach, but if it's in nonfiction, to me, even the idea, as Charlotte was suggesting, of creating composite characters, for example, I turn to fiction if I want to do that, you know?
Yeah, I was wondering if that was a product of your journalism and sort of because it seems like we've had panels on this in the past, and whenever we've had a journalist who's writing a lot of nonfiction pieces, they have such a hard time wrapping their heads around what seems permissible in memoir and other pieces versus journalism. Charlotte, how do you answer that question?
It's very similar to Antonio. I mean, because I started out in fiction, because I was an early reader, and fiction was where I kind of found myself. But like a lot of writers, my first book it has a lot of the actual events in it. But I like the Russian characters, but I was sitting there one day and I was like, the dad has glasses. That's not my dad. And then it gave me permissions to do other things. And my mom hated that book. And when it was republished, and she read it again, and she's like, I know that mom character's not me because she's barefoot and I hate being barefoot. So like she said, was finding ways to not read herself in it when the first time she was reading herself in it. And then with the other novel that I've just finished, I saw my mom this summer. She's like, what are you writing? And I was working on fiction, so I didn't tell her about the memoir. And I said, it's got I'm working on a novel. And she said, well, what about the mother character? And I said, she's dead, but she's a badass. And my mom goes, perfect.
Granted.
Yeah. But I have published personal essays and written about family. And most of the time I don't check in with my mom, but with my siblings, I do. Particularly, my sister deals with health issues. My brother dealt with sexual abuse, and I named it in an essay, and that's his experience. But I was talking about a larger dynamic around silence, and particularly around religious stuff and sexual abuse with boys. And so I sent it to him, but I talked to him about what my intentions were. My intentions were to educate people, to shine a light on something. And I tried so hard not to be someone who was exploiting that. And I told him my intention, and I think that's very important in memoir, particularly when you're at the point to start sharing it. I said, this is what I'm trying to do. And he read it and goes, I totally support what you've written. So I think that's, when you're asking yourself, what genre do I want to publish this in? You have to ask yourself different kinds of questions. And someone did ask, like, what's the difference between autobiography and memoir? And I think that's really important, because autobiography tends to be the story of a whole life, and a memoir is focused on a time period or a theme. And I think that's helpful when you're thinking about which genre.
Mm-hmm. And I actually wanted to go to Mira's question, which is in the chat box, because I think it's also really interesting and is sort of tied to what we're talking about. So what kind of ethical conundrum could a writer find themselves in attempting to write a memoir when the writer suffers from cognitive distortions, meaning experiencing the moment may be false as well as true? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
It makes me think of Lauren Slatter's book called Lying, a Metaphorical Memoir. And I think the first line is, I lie, but it's presented to the world as memoir. And she says that she has a severe medical situation and that causes seizures, and she has surgery for it. And you don't know if any of it is true, because she's put that thing at the beginning. That's a very extreme example. But I think that in the situation where someone was experiencing cognitive distortions, it might be kind of, I don't mean this in a flippant way, but to try and capture some of the different versions and let those multiple versions, and then you're trying to, I'm naming all these different realities, and where is the truth, so that the reader is kind of inside the experience with the narrator, as it seems, if I'm understanding this, as truth seems to move around.
That's a great answer. I also want to talk to you both about fiction versus nonfiction, meaning which do you like better? No, I'm not going to ask you that, but I guess you're both writing in those two different categories. You have written, pieces that have gotten a lot of attention, and you're clearly gifted writers in both of these categories. So can you just talk about, are you turning your fiction brain on and off when you're approaching nonfiction? What is the difference for you as writers, or do you think of them any differently? Is it just, I'm sitting down at my desk and I'm going to write what I'm writing today, and it doesn't matter whether it's fiction or nonfiction? Charlotte, your head is very big on my screen, so I'm going to start with you.
Make it bigger. I am someone, again, I think that what Antonio said about like you can tell a deeper emotional truth with fiction than you can with nonfiction. So that is something that's very true for me. No, I'm just being ridiculous because what's true. But I'm really interested in what I call the shadow plot. What could have happened in this moment? So the current novel that I have, it is, well, in that moment where that potential was there, and in reality, it didn't flip that way, but what if it had? And for me, that tends to show up as violence. So what if the threat that was there, if it had played out, how would that have changed the trajectory of these characters' lives? So I tend to ask myself, like, what is more interesting to me? What's going to allow me to grow as a human being, to grow as a writer? And often it's that choice of like, do I want to dive into the shadow plot? But I think you can do that in memoir if you signal to a reader if you are going to do that. But for me, it works bigger on the larger scale of a novel to think about that flipping of the trajectory.
But just to stick with you for a second, I guess I'm just curious, do you, besides that sort of bigger picture, that kind of, how the story might unfold or not unfold, just as a writer, are you going into the same toolbox and using the same tools when you're approaching nonfiction and memoir as you are with fiction?
I think so, in terms of like the scene, dialogue, plot, imagery, even plot, like is there rising tension, those kind of things. I think the exception of what is in the toolkit as a nonfiction writer is in the more of the direct naming of it, like the reflective voice in memoir. And I guess that's what it's, that in the nonfiction toolkit is a stronger Charlotte in there, versus in a fiction thing, it's going to be a character, of course, based on me, but it's going to be more distant.
Gotcha. Antonio, what about you? Fiction versus nonfiction brain?
Well, I can't decide what I'm going to write in fiction, because in fiction, my stories usually start with these weird images that come to my mind, like little epiphanies that usually don't have to do anything with me, with strange characters. Like, I don't know, a kid that's on a beach in the Mediterranean Sea, and all of a sudden, like a ton of dead fish turn up, washed out on the beach. It's an image that I have right now that's kind of like hovering, like haunting me. And I know that it will eventually become part of a fiction piece, but I can't control it. It has nothing to do with me seemingly right now. If you go back and take a look at the stories in the collection that I published, I could tell you the specific image that prompted each one of them. And in none of those images, I am the protagonist, as in Antonio. In personal essays or in a memoir, the protagonist is always me, and it comes everything comes from memory, and how I wrestle with memory, how I wrestle with the emotions that elicited from that memory, but it's different, and I sort of can control the journey in nonfiction. In fiction, as I said, I can't control it. I don't decide, oh, now I'm going to write about this and that. It's beyond my control.
So let's talk a little bit about publishing when it comes to personal essays, because I think that for those who are listening in and who are writing short pieces or are thinking about writing short pieces, you know, the next question is, well, who's going to actually want this, and how am I going to find my readership for this? So could you both talk about your experience with publishing short nonfiction, and then, you know, if it makes sense, I think short fiction would be interesting as well, because it's sort of in the same space sometimes. Antonio, starting with you.
Okay. I think I'm the worst writer to provide advice around submission.
Great. Let's really dig in.
Gonna tell you all about it. Yeah, no, I mean, around fiction, when I started writing the stories for the collection when I was in my MFA, and it just, as every other writer and creative writing student, I would start just submitting my pieces to everywhere, right? Where I think they would be interested. None of those submissions were successful. I never managed to publish anything on any journal just because I submitted to it. Like zero. None. And I think I stopped keeping track of rejections when I counted, I think, like 88, which is nothing compared to many other writers. So it's not like a big deal. Through friends or mentors who had read some stories from the book, they suggested, hey, why don't you submit this to this editor in that journal? So they kind of like referred me to them. So it was easier. And when I submitted those pieces to those two editors, one of them was actually Paul Lisicki, actually, now that I'm remembering. At Quarterly Review.
Where was he when you submitted to him?
Excuse me?
Where was he working when you submitted to him? Or the author who, he's the author who referred you to other people?
Elizabeth McCracken, who's my mentor and friend at UT, she said, hey, why don't you reach out to Paul Lisicki, because I think he's looking for submissions for Quarterly Review. Mm-hmm. And I think, and so I reached out to him and say, hey, I have a couple stories. And I thought, okay, these two stories might be a good fit. So I submitted a couple of them, and he loved one of them. And that was how I was published. And then with nonfiction, usually what happens is an editor approaches me to say, hey, why don't you write about this? Or would you be interested in writing something for the magazine or the journal? And they give me some clues, like something about travel, or something about your childhood, or something about the experience of writing in your second language, or whatever. And I say, yeah, because I have this journalistic approach, it's easier for me to work on assignment. If you give me an assignment, I'll write something. I don't know what, but I will have something by the deadline that you give me. That hasn't happened to me in fiction. It's very rare that they assign you a fiction piece, right? Right. But I guess if somebody would ask me, I would try to do it.
So we did have a question. How can you find a mentor if you're not part of an MFA program? And, you know, I think one of the things that you said was that you had people that you knew, a mentor, but also, you know, maybe even just being connected to the literary community wherever you are, taking workshops. They don't have to be MFA program workshops. They can be workshops with individual authors, and they can be workshops that are happening through organizations like ours or other organizations. ACC has a great creative writing program that allows folks to come in, drop in, and take classes. But the other thing that you said, Antonio, that I thought was really valuable, and maybe you could, I don't know if you want to speak more to it or if we need to, but just the idea that you were told to send a piece to a particular journal, but you then found the right piece for that journal, meaning I would assume you actually read the journals and the other places that you're thinking about approaching so that you're actually aware of what they're publishing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that applies to almost every part of the publishing process, from finding a home for a specific piece, to finding an agent, to finding a publisher, to finding a mentor. I mean, this is a business, let's call it business, that's based basically on two main pillars: self-doubt and rejection, right?
Self-doubt and rejection.
Yeah.
That was almost the topic for the panel, but we thought we would just get there organically.
But what this means to me is that a rejection is just an opinion. It's not a judgment on the quality of your work. And we can discuss a lot of books tonight, for example, that I might think are wonderful and Charlotte might think, I didn't really like it. And it's the same when you submit to journals and when you're trying to find an agent. What you need to find somebody who falls in love with your work, and you will find that home. And the fact that a journal rejects you or a specific editor doesn't like your work, that doesn't mean per se that there's something wrong with it. It's just that it's not the right fit. So that's how I think, that's how it's I handle rejection, because you keep getting rejected all the time, regardless of whether you have published something or not. Just reminding myself, this is just an opinion. This is not the right fit. I need to keep looking for that right fit. And that's what you need to do. And reading those journals, making sure that those editors are aligned in their tastes with the type of work that you are producing is key.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. Charlotte, how would you answer this question about publishing short fiction or personal essay?
I find that it's easier to get nonfiction published than it is short fiction for me. Maybe other people have a reverse experience, but I know places like the Denver Quarterly, they're looking for nonfiction, and I've submitted to them a lot and they haven't accepted my work, but I know that they're looking for nonfiction. I submitted a piece in November of 2018 to the Sun magazine. To me, that's like amazing if I could get in there. And they wrote me back, and one guy said, I really liked it, but the other folks weren't on board. So I sent that to my writing partner, who we exchange pages once a month and give each other feedback. That's something else that people can do who are looking for mentors. And she said, write them back and ask if it's a hard pass or if they'll look at another revision. So I took exactly what she wrote and sent it back to them. And they said, yeah, we'd love to look at a revision. Here's some things to consider. I revised it. 6 months later, I got it back and they said, a different person at the Sun said, we'd like you to consider these things. And they were great points. The essay got so much better. I sent it to them and I found out yesterday that they're going to pass on it. And I'm so glad that one of my students asked me, she said, won't you be mad if you've done all this work and they don't accept it? And I'm so glad she asked, because they had the opportunity to say to her, I will be grateful because I know I have a really good essay now and I can submit it to somewhere else. The thing about the Sun is that they don't like simultaneous submissions, but now I have this piece that I really believe in. And I have been someone who, it's the last 3 years, I'm like, I'm going to get things out there and someone is going to like it or connect with it. And I've had some success with that. I would encourage folks to, if the second piece of nonfiction that I had published, it's a very, very intense, grim piece. And if you have something like that, you should check out Pithead Chapel. Because they publish gutsy material. And then the other thing, if you're looking for places to submit, Poets and Writers has a great list of places that you can submit to. And then there's also Duotrope, Duotrope. I think it costs $50 to join. I don't love their interface, but you can get super valuable information. That's when I knew if I submitted something to Tin House when they were still publishing, that their average of response time was 365 days. And sometimes if you know the stats of a place and they organize it, like these are the people who give you the quickest turnaround. These are the people that are the easiest to get into. I don't actually want someone to turn something around in 1 week. I want the fantasy of an editorial board discussing my piece and then after thoughtful consideration, rejecting it. That's something I know about myself. So I think Duotrope is a really good option. And I just want to underscore what Antonia and Becka said, read the journals you want to be published in.
Mm-hmm.
I got all riled up.
I love it when you get riled up. Go to independent bookstores. And I know Book People here in Austin has obviously we're not going there today, I know, guys, but you can go and really browse when you can browse shelves again. Seek out journals you've never heard of. And I think also another tip would be to look at regional journals, because there can be journals, smaller ones in your area or somewhere else in Texas that would be great for getting your feet wet and approaching some folks who might be interested in publishing other Texas writers if you're here in Texas. So we're gonna
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, of course.
In the Best American Essays, they have a list of the finalists, and that's where I'm choosing to submit my stuff. And those journalists where the finalists or honorable mentions are published, that's where I'm choosing to send my stuff. That's how I'm getting the list. Thank you.
That's a great tip. And I think you could also look at, collections of, I'm looking at the Gia Tolentino right here. You could look at essay collections and look for the places in those collections where those individual pieces were published. If that writer, if you feel like your voice or what you're writing about is similar to that person. So what we asked both Antonio and Charlotte to give us some books that they thought they would be mentioning tonight, or that they would want to just say a few words about with regard to this category. And we're going to start with you first. Antonio, you have two parts, part one and part two. So we'll start with this. Is there anything, I know you talked about the art of the personal essay. What would you like to say about this, this collection of books?
Well, I think most of the essays that you'll find there are classics in one way or the other. So if I get academic, if you want to have a good education on the personal essay, a good foundation, I think it's just a great starting point. The essays are, just the scope and the in terms of like the variety of voices and topics and moments in history that these essays cover is just tremendous. And also because it's important, I think it costs like $14. So
cool.
I think it's a great buy.
And how about any of these other books that we're looking at here? Can you see the screen with Sally Mann and Frank Conroy? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Sally Mann, I love her photography. For those of you who don't know her, she's one of the most iconic photographers in America in the last, 50 years. And it's her, some of her work has been deemed kind of like controversial. And I've always loved her work. And I think this memoir in particular I loved it because he writes about his creative process, how she has dealt with some of the controversies around her work, her family. She's been photographing her family for many, many years, and other topics. She talks about the South, and I think it's a masterful example of how to write about your own experiences doing art out of very people who are very close to you, but also around sensitive topics, and how you can kind of like investigate your own memory and your own thoughts and your own uncertainties around the topics that you are writing about. I think, and it has a lot of photographies. She goes into kind of like a very detailed depictions of the process that she went through in writing, in photographing some of those projects, and I just found it amazing. I just loved it, and just the scope of it is incredible.
And the Frank Conroy, what can you tell us about that one?
Frank Conroy's Stop Time is a classic. I think it was published, let me go back and see, 1967. So if you think about like memoirs, which we tend to think that it's kind of like a contemporary genre, which is definitely not. This is more like an autobiography. He starts when he's very young, and I think the book ends when he's about to start college after trying to run away from home, moving to Europe. A lot of things happen in between, but it's kind of like a foundational memoir with a very specific voice. And I just loved it. And the language is just beautiful. And because it was written in 1967, it has kind of like a different perspective on what it means to be male in America, or a young male in America around that time. So I found it pretty intriguing.
And then the Gia Tolentino, I know that you said you haven't necessarily read this collection, but that you're a fan of her personal essays. And can you just speak to what it is about what she's doing that excites you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think somebody has described her as the Joan Didion of our time, in the way of how Joan Didion would write about this. She would approach the all-American topics like, I don't know, serial killers or California as this mythical place in the 60s, and just reveal something that is just in front of our eyes and nobody else can see. And I think Gia Tolentino is doing kind of that with our present. Like, she could write something amazing about Instagram, for example. So when you think about, well, this is just happening too quickly, like we feel like we're living in the future and we need to take a break in order to digest it. I think Gia Tolentino is being able to digest it for us and render these beautiful essays where you can learn a lot. And I think one of the things that makes a personal essay great is that it covers the surface of things, but delivers something profound about the way we live. And I think that's something that you can find in her essays.
Cool. So we have a part 2 here.
Okay.
About these books.
I'll try to go faster.
No, I love everything you're saying.
Francisco Cantu's The Line Becomes a River is a very interesting memoir because he joined the Border Patrol in order to try to understand our immigration system and immigration as a whole. And I think it's a very honest book, very interesting in his own approach to why he joins the Border Patrol, and how he wrestles with that job. And the book doesn't end there. At some point, he's already left the Border Patrol, and how he deals with the aftermath of that decision. I think it's very, very interesting. And it's in like other books that I think are mentioned here, he wrestles with complicated topics. And I think that's interesting. That's always something that intrigues me about memoirs and personal essays, when you tackle a complicated topic and when you are going to be portrayed as a complicated character yourself. And I think that's a good example of that, Francisco's memoir. And then Lucy Greeley's Autobiography of a Face and Anne Patchett's Truth and Beauty, it's kind of like a combo. You know, like you don't have to read both books back to back, but it's a wonderful experience to do so, because Lucy and Anne met when they were very young. I think when they went to college in Sarah Lawrence, and then they became friends for years until, well, something happened to one of them. I'm not going to spoil the story for you. But Lucy's memoir talks about how when she was a kid, she was diagnosed with cancer and a third of her jaw had to be removed. So from that young age, her life changed completely because of her physical appearance. And Anne's Truth and Beauty is her account of her friendship with Lucy Greeley. So both books are just heartbreaking and beautifully written, and again, it's both are great examples of how to deal with really personal experiences, heartbreaking and beautiful and profound at the same time. And Patti Smith's Just Kids, it's somehow similar to these two that I just mentioned. This is her account of her relationship with the photographer Robert Mapplethorpe. They became friends when I think Patti moves to New York, and that's the story of their friendship throughout the years. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book, and it's just amazing how Patti Smith, who was not a fiction writer or a nonfiction writer before this book, she can just write sentences that break your heart.
I love that book. It's so good. Yeah. So Charlotte, we want to hear from you, and here's some of the books that you mentioned you thought would be good examples for folks.
Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to put Eula Biss's book on immunity has to do with this passage in it. And it's really interesting because this is a book about inoculations and the choice to vaccinate and to not, and the vulnerability of being a parent, and how we want to try to protect our children. She's such an amazing writer, the way she brings things in. But it was really interesting, where it says, by the end of the summer, the evening news was running footage of people wearing white surgical masks in airports. The novel influenza virus was officially pandemic at that point. Churches were serving holy wafers on toothpicks, and airlines were removing pillows and blankets from their flights. What surprises me now is how unremarkable this seemed at me at the time. It all became the part of the landscape of a new motherhood, where ordinary objects like pillows and blankets have the power to kill a newborn. And then she goes on, and I just thought it was really interesting, because I know some of my students are wondering about, like, does my memoir matter at this moment? And I think that if you can, that going back to the current self commenting on the younger self, that's a way to bring it in. So I was just struck by that. And I wanted to, Heartberries, this book kind of swept a lot of people. And I think it's really good for people to read because it has it's so unique in its style. And I think if you're someone who doesn't write traditional memoir, like with the beginning, middle, and end, this is a book that could give you a lot of permission. I also really recommend The Still Point of the Turning World by Emily Rapp. This is a very heavy book. It's about her son who died of Tay-Sachs. And it's about what it means to show up in the face of incredible loss. And it's a really powerfully written book. And I don't know, just I thought of it when I was thinking about books for tonight. She has another memoir called Poster Child, which is really great too. And then writing the memoir, this book is very simple and profound because it really walks you through a lot of different aspects of truth telling and what does memory mean, and writing about other people and how do you bring in the larger world. Oh, I did have one page I wanted to read. I marked it with the doctor bill. I don't know what that says about me. This one line from Barrington: although inner work is essential to the writing, at some point you must take a step back and read through what you have written, asking yourself if the story is grounded in the world beyond your personal life. And I think that she gives this really cool diagram in there. So if you're trying to figure out how to make your memoir universal, I think that chapter in particular is really good. And the other great thing about this book is that it has a chapter on how to form a writing group. And it gives very specific guidelines, because I think a lot of people think writing groups happen magically. And you have to have some really great boundaries and clear communication when you set those things up.
Are either of you in a writing group?
I have this one person that I work with once a month.
Yeah. Antonio, you?
When everything that I write is ready to be shared, I have a couple of friends whom I share my work with, and I trust them. And then my wife is the first reader. She needs to read everything. Otherwise, it's not approved.
Well, we're always wrestling with how to facilitate some writerly meetups here. So maybe I'll get a copy of that book and check it out for myself. Some of the last lingering questions that we had during the talk, there was one question: what is the protocol regarding submissions, one by one or simultaneous? Can either of you speak to that?
Almost every, if you go to a magazine, you should look at their website. But also the cool thing about the poets and writers listing is it gives you a little overview and then a link to that page, which will tell you about submissions. But almost every place will say to you whether they do or do not accept simultaneous submissions. 90% of the places do, but there are exceptions like the Sun, and there's one other one I can't remember, and it's the way they've written it's like, if you submit to us and to someone else at the same time, we will never publish your work. They're very intense, but so if you read the submission guidelines, you'll get that information.
Okay, perfect. And do either of you have any advice for pitching guest blogs? Have either of you had any experience doing writing for other people's blogs or writing for blogs in general? You can say no if you don't, but no. What
I think you have to do is be a regular attendee of that blog and make comments. And so you start to build a relationship, and that your comments are meaningful on point and you're actually contributing to the conversation, which might make the host blogger go, oh, this person is bringing something already to the table. I'd like to hear more from them.
And then I think the last question that we found that hadn't been answered is about, back when we were talking about voice, there was a question about point of view. And I would be curious how you both think of point of view when you're writing personal essay and memoir. Antonio, I'm going to start with you because
I would tend to think that I would find it hard to write a personal essay or a memoir piece in a point of view that wasn't me or mine. Just because of what I said before, I think it's part of my professional background. I think in terms of, I would question, why would you like to write a memoir piece from the perspective of somebody else if this is going to be about your own experience? And just writing about my own experience in third person would feel unnerving. So yeah, I guess my answer is pretty basic there. I can only foresee, at least in my case, I can only see myself writing personal essays and memoir in first person. But I don't know what you think, Charlotte.
Yeah, Charlotte, you're over there bending the rules. What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do know when I was working on my beautiful memoir that keeps getting rejected, and I'm quoting people, I'm not just like blowing its horn. But the first 100 pages I wrote in the second person, which I knew wasn't sustainable, but they were kind of addressed to my father, and it actually helped me articulate some of the things that I wouldn't have been able to in the first person, but I went back and changed all of it. In that book, it's 34 chapters, and 7 of those chapters, they're very short. 7 are a third person perspective on my father. His name was Jerry. And so Jerry rode his horse, Jerry did this. And that's one of the reasons it's been challenging to find a home, is because people say it's non-traditional memoir. I say I carry his stories. And so that's why it's important to me to have it in that, have it in those sections in third person. And I've had one personal essay that's written in the second person that's been published, which is about pelvic floor physical therapy, and you can go find it if you want. But that one is interesting because it's trying to use humor to talk about the vulnerability of the body. So I think there might be, if someone is working on a memoir piece that's so intense, the second person might make sense in the drafting process, even the third person, to try to get some distance on it. But no, you have to move it back generally to the first person.
Do either of you have any thoughts on a younger writer wanting to write memoirs? So sort of that idea of, you have to have lived a certain amount of time before you're able to reflect on your years. What advice do you have for a young writer who wants to approach memoir?
I don't know who said it, but it's like, if you've lived to 8, you have enough to write about. But so last semester I had 2 19-year-olds and an 80-year-old and some other students in there. It was really interesting. And one of the 19-year-olds wrote this amazing piece about being so annoyed with her mother, and like her mother was the very thing she needed, but was also standing in her way. I think anybody, if they pay attention to their own if they pay attention to their own experience with some deep thought, and they have the opportunity to cultivate the skills of craft, you can write. And I also think it's really important to not dismiss the perspective of young people or older people.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Antonio.
No, I just was going to say that I completely agree with Charlotte, and that you need to have enough distance with the material to be able to approach it objectively. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a certain age. You can be 50 years old or 60 and not have enough distance with the material, or you can be 20 and have enough distance and enough objectivity to write about that experience. And I was just going to say that another memoir that I read recently was Said Jones' How We Fight for Our Lives, which won the Kirkus Prize last year. And I think a lot of people, when he was writing that memoir, he's a poet, would tell him, aren't you a little bit young to be writing a memoir already? And that's a perfect example of how you can't be too young to write a wonderful memoir.
Yeah. Guys, I would like to just talk to you for another hour. Is that cool? No. Thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. I've had such a great time just hearing both of your perspectives, and I imagine that our attendees feel the same way. So we are grateful to you, and we will be sharing this recording. It will go up on our YouTube channel A reminder to everybody that we do have another event next Thursday where you can have all of your audiobook questions answered. And they're also actually going to recommend some great audiobooks for right now. And we're going to have some giveaways if that's an incentive at all. But mostly just a big thank you to our two panelists. It's so awkward almost to end these panels now, since we're used to being in a room of 70 to 100 people who are all applauding you and they come up afterwards and talk to you individually. So instead, we'll just let people show their appreciation in the chat box, and you know, I'll stick around to answer any questions about the Writers League that you guys might have in the chat. And I imagine Charlotte and Antonio will keep an eye on the chat for a few minutes too if there's any individual questions to them. But otherwise, thank you, attendees, for being here. We set a record tonight for our online webinar. That's sort of, is that redundant? Online webinar, it's the same thing. But so thanks for being here, guys. Thanks for spending time with us. And thank you again to Charlotte and Antonio. And you guys are welcome to drop off anytime you want to.
And thank you, as always, for being such a fabulous moderator.
Oh my goodness, you stop it.
Yeah, thank you. This was great. I really, really enjoyed it. It was great to see you both again.
Take care of yourselves, guys.
You too.
You too.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.